Hello and welcome to another very entertaining video. Today's topic is hematopoiesis, and it's just meant to be an introduction to the whole concept of what blood is and where it comes from. Specifically, what we'd like to cover is the topic of erythropoiesis, which is specifically defined as the production of red blood cells. But before we get into the details of that, I'd like to just go back and think about why we need red blood cells, how much of this stuff is going on a day, which is kind of astounding. And then we'd like to talk about how this is regulated in the body, how the body knows how many red blood cells to form. A typical red blood cell has a lifespan of about 120 days. Now, you might ask, why is it so short, right? That's only 4 months. But remember, the red blood cell really is just a bag of hemoglobin. It no longer has a nucleus. It has shed all its organelles, right? So no mitochondria. And as we think about this, right, with no nucleus, no genetic material, it's not making any protein. So no new protein. And no mitochondria, that means no electron transport chain, which means it relies solely on glycolysis for energy. So no new protein, limited energy. All it is a bag of hemoglobin with a very specific purpose of transporting oxygen and waste products like carbon dioxide in the blood. And now we can see why it really only has 4 months to live. Now that might not seem like too big of a deal, but let's put this into context. At any given time, the average adult has about 25 times 10 to the 12th, in other words, 25 trillion red blood cells in circulation. That's a lot. That's a lot of cells that make up the approximately 5 liters of blood that is coursing through your body right now. If these only have a 4-month lifespan, then what this means is that to sustain that kind of population, we need to be making around 210 billion new cells every day. So how does this happen? Where does this take place? Well, to understand erythropoiesis, we've got to think about 2 different locations within the body. To make these 210 billion cells every day, what do we need? We need red bone marrow. So long bones in the body are filled with red bone marrow. Of course, in adolescence, you've got a lot more bones that are filled with bone marrow, red anyways, and as you get older, this tends to be limited to certain types of bones, and other bones that had red bone marrow transition to yellow bone marrow. It's fat and energy storage, stuff like that. But red bone marrow, this is what we're interested in when we think about production of red blood cells. The other organ that we're interested in is the kidney, and it's the crosstalk between these 2 systems that makes sure we have the right amount of red blood cells to sustain life. So let's focus, first of all, on what's going on in the red bone marrow. Within the red bone marrow, we have a stem cell called a hematopoietic stem cell. I'm just going to abbreviate that HSC, hematopoietic stem cell. I just want to quickly define what this word right here means when we talk about stem cells. What a stem cell is a cell that can divide asynchronously, right? Typically, if we think about normal cell division, we've got cell A, and it gives rise to 2 identical daughter cells. That's a synchronous cell division. But stem cells don't work like that. Stem cells give rise to a unique daughter cell. We'll color code that blue. And also self-renew. So the division leaves behind a stem cell and a daughter cell. In this way, the stem cell population is always present, but it's always giving rise to downstream cell types. And these cell types can be different. For the hematopoietic stem cell, let's just list some of the cell types that this one cell will give rise to, all within the bone marrow. How about a megakaryocyte? The megakaryocyte is all about platelet production, which is important for clotting. We can also think of nonspecific immune cells, basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, closely related macrophages. These are all involved in nonspecific aspects of immunity, among other things. We also have specific immunity. So T cells, B cells, which are our antigen or our antibody producing cells. We could add natural killer cells to this. And lastly, our red blood cell. So the hematopoietic stem cell is in charge of all of these things. It's the one cell in that red bone marrow that's making all of this stuff. And what we need to do is figure out how to keep it balanced so that we're making the right type of cell at the right time according to need. So let's come back up to where this is going on. And our job is to go from hematopoietic stem cell to a mature red blood cell. Now, it's not just a one and done kind of thing. There are a couple of steps along the way that we can look at. The first one will be a common myeloid progenitor. This is going to give rise to a proerythroblast. Interestingly, this cell still has a nucleus, so it's still capable of cell division. There's some other steps in between, right? The basophilic erythroblast, the polychromatic erythroblast, as this thing transitions to the next cell that we want to mention, and that is the reticulocyte. The reticulocyte is like the juvenile red blood cell. This is actually released out into circulation. When we think of reticular, we think of web structure, so the nucleus has been shed, but there is still some ribosomes present in this, so it gives it kind of an interesting looking shape and structure. But still, this is where we've got mostly hemoglobin at this point, and this represents about 1% of all circulating red blood cells. And then when those last ribosomes are finally shed, destroyed, all we have left is the red blood cell, which is just a cell membrane with about 250 million molecules of hemoglobin in it. So lastly, then, the question is, if the hematopoietic stem cell can turn into all of these different things, how does it know to turn into the red blood cell? And this is where the kidney comes into play. Within the kidney, there are cells right around the peritubular capillaries that are really good at sensing hypoxia. Hypoxia simply is decreased oxygen. They're very sensitive to the amount of oxygen in the blood. And of course, because red blood cells carry oxygen, this is the measurement that we use. And with decreased oxygen, with hypoxia, a signal is sent by these cells to support the production of red blood cells. And it happens very early on, right? Even as these HSCs are turning into these common myeloid progenitors, the signal is called erythropoietin, often abbreviated EPO. This is what's released by the kidney to tell the hematopoietic stem cells, essentially, to turn into red blood cells, to support the growth, to keep these early progenitor cells from dying off from apoptosis. And it's absolutely required for the production of red blood cells. This is how the body maintains the right balance with, billions of red blood cells dying every day and billions of red blood cells being made new every day. The balance is maintained by EPO.